Multiple global crises, from terrorism, war, disease to catastrophic climate change. It's a worrying picture. World leaders are in New York for a climate summit and the United Nations General Assembly, and their issues at the top of their agendas. And they're at the top of my agenda, as I'm very lucky to be joined by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Many thanks for being with us on the programme.
It's a great pleasure to meet you and discuss about all these problems with you.
Well, the world does seem quite a frightening place right now, and at the heart of UN mandates is maintaining peace and security. Do you get the feeling that things are unravelling, that they're spiralling out of control?
The United Nations is in lead in fighting against all these challenges, including ISIL terrorism and addressing Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Of course, there are many other areas, situations in South Sudan, Central African Republic, Libya, Somalia. It seems that we are living in a world of multiple crises, but when the world is united, we can handle these crises. It's good and encouraging that many world leaders are coming to the General Assembly of the United Nations. This is the right moment. They should demonstrate their leadership. Unity of purpose is very important.
We've asked our global audience, online audience, to get involved in this interview, and we've had hundreds of questions. We received this question from Dominic Gora, and who asks, can you identify the single biggest threat at the moment?
This General Assembly has three most important crisis issues. First, ISIL terrorism. This is a threat to whole humanity. We have to address this one together with strong measure and unity and solidarity. Second, climate change. This is an issue of a defining moment of our time. We have to address this one to contain the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade. Otherwise, if we do not take action now, we'll have to pay much heavier price. Another one, Ebola outbreak in West Africa. These are three most critical and important and serious crises which require urgent action and mobilizing massive resources and political will. And that's why we are gathering here today.
US President Barack Obama has said he's going to use the UNGA to rally more people behind the cause of fighting IS, Islamic State. He says he wants to, quote, degrade and ultimately destroy this group. But do you think it's actually possible to destroy a group like Islamic State?
We need concerted, wholehearted support and solidarity to address and tackle this terrorism. Therefore, we have to mobilize all resources. I appreciate President Obama and the leaders of Western Europe, like France and United Kingdom or Australia, who really are willing to provide their means. Of course, there are many other countries who are willing to do that. If not, I'm afraid that these terrorist elements will spread all around the world.
Would you be prepared to negotiate? You're the diplomat of diplomats with Islamic State.
Now, we have seen the barbarity, tragic, so unacceptable, unspeakable behavior by beheading or brutality. So we have to really first address this one. We have to show a strong will of the international community that we will never allow this terrorist element.
The strategy is so complicated when you're faced with a group like IS. Are you still within your comfort zone when we see a coalition maintaining a military combat mission in Iraq without UN backing?
In principle, the military means is not all. If we have seen this 4-year-long Syrian crisis, tragedy, and this Syrian tragedy has provided a perfect breeding ground for terrorism to put their roots there. This is a very dangerous situation, and we expect the world leaders, wherever the countries may be, they should reach out to the people and try to constantly try to listen to the voices of people, what their challenges, their grievances, and their aspirations are.
But do you support the bombing campaign of Iraq that's being led by the US and France?
I have supported United States military operation in Iraq, which was done at the request of Iraqi government. That I have supported. Of course, we need some solidarity of all the countries who have means and the will to address this one, because this is a common threat to humanity.
What about Syria? How does one deal with Syria? Because the strategy there is far from clear. I've seen Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and I'll quote him here, and he says, "Syria and Iran are our natural allies in the fight." He's got a point. Do you agree with him?
It's encouraging to see that there is a growing consensus among the international community that they have to address in any way this terrorism.
But should Syria and Iran be more involved?
The member states of the Security Council are actively engaging in consultation to discuss about the options, various options how to address this one, including how they can take action in Syria.
But a resolution would be pretty much impossible at Security Council level.
The Security Council, under the leadership of chairmanship of President Obama, is going to address these foreign fighters issues, including terrorism issues. I hope the Security Council will really try to be able to be united and find a good solution to this matter.
Do you think that Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, president of Syria, could once again become an ally in the fight here?
This current situation is a consequence of a Syrian situation. It's not the cause. That he should understand. And he should also do all what he can to counter terrorism. Then there is a growing coalition in the international community.
Could he form part of that coalition then?
That I'll have to see, what kind of option will be taken.
The parameters of warfare seem to be disintegrating, morally disintegrating. As you mentioned, we're seeing beheadings, but we're also seeing children targeted more and more, not only in Iraq, but in Syria, and also in the recent conflict between Israelis and the Palestinians, which you called a moral outrage. Are the parameters of warfare changing now? Is this modern warfare today?
There is a moral boundary, and we have Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's not that we do not have all these guidelines and principles. It's the people who do not respect this one. Therefore, unless international community is fully united, and there should be a dialogue among religious leaders and or political leaders and civil society leaders, so that there should be always a very clear call and voice coming from whole people of the world, so that they should listen to these calls.
But the ideology is so powerful. If we go back just very briefly to Syria, the ideology that is bringing together, or Islamic State to be more precise, the ideology is so powerful that we're seeing young people in droves joining this group. They're not hearing that message. How do you counter that?
I'm concerned about this kind of ideology or certain belief dictates the thinking of belief of other people. This is totally not acceptable. We may not be able to eradicate all this overnight. That is why, while we take a firm position, we are expecting the world leaders to exercise their leadership more inclusive way, listening to the voices of the people, and prevent any potential source of conflict or grievances shared by the people. That's very important. That's why my message has always been very consistent and strong. Listen carefully to the voices of the people. That is why we have seen so many domestic internal conflicts. Yes.
So if we look, I mentioned briefly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The two sides seem more polarized than ever. Do you think that within your own mandate, which ends in December 2016, that a peace agreement is possible?
It's encouraging that this ceasefire is largely holding, but this is very fragile. That is why we are still working very hard, speaking to leaders of both sides. They have identified the underlying issues, fundamental root problems, root causes of the issues. If they do not address root causes, the current ceasefire may be just temporary, which is not durable one, which may again set a certain environment for another violence.
It happens every 2 to 3 years.
It's very sad that, that is why I have been urging the leaders of two sides to sit down together, and they have identified all the problems already. It's a matter of agreement, how you can be flexible and compromising for the vision, with the vision of a better future.
Are you optimistic, though, about this?
Well, I'm always working with optimism. As a Secretary General, I have to constantly send the message of hope and optimism. Of course, we are committed to reconstruct the Gaza. The level of destruction
Reconstruction is not the problem, though.
Yes, there should be. If reconstruction is done without the firm foundation of a political solution, it's useless. As we have seen, in 2009 there was a serious destruction, and we rebuilt, and it was redestroyed in 2012, and it has been redestroyed. That's why I have been saying that we cannot continue like this. Build, destroy, build, destroy. This should be the last time we rebuild. We are ready to rebuild, but there must be a political solution.
And that political solution must also come at UN Security Council level. It must be extremely frustrating for you that the 5 veto-wielding nations often use their veto for their own interests. And we received this question from Carrie Ma, who says, does the UN have a voice faced with these UN veto-wielding nations?
Of course, United Nations has been deeply involved, engaged in this. It was I and the Secretary Kerry of the United States who have been really trying to bring this violence to a ceasefire, together with some key countries like Egypt, and there are many countries who have been helping. Then all this should be handled in political dialogue.
But it must be very frustrating for you, not that you...
Of course, very frustrating, but it is encouraging to know that the members of the Security Council are actively discussing about the possibility of adopting a resolution, at the Security Council to, first of all, help reconstruct this Gaza, as well as to ensure some effective monitoring and verification mechanisms for this ceasefire.
We've got a lot to cover, so I'm just going to quickly look at the situation in Ukraine before we look at climate change. Ukraine has a tentative, and I emphasize the word tentative, peace deal. Are you satisfied with the situation there?
I'm encouraged that this ceasefire based on Minsk protocol is largely holding, even though we have seen some occasional sporadic violence happening, and there has been some humanitarian assistance delivered. The United Nations has been, from the beginning, including myself, trying to help both Ukraine and the Russian leaders sit down together. I'm encouraged that they are talking and meeting and talking over the phones, and I've been continuously encouraging them to do so.
But the loss of Crimea, is that the price of peace? Do you think Ukraine will regain Crimea?
We have already made it quite clear, our positions, that the territorial integrity and sovereignty of our country should be fully respected in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. I again urge the leaders of both Ukraine and Russia always sit down together and discuss this matter sincerely for the peace and security not only of Ukraine but in the region. It has a much greater implication than national and regional. It has a global implication. It can affect not only political and security, but it can also affect the global economy.
Another issue that can affect the global economy, and this issue very close to your heart, is that of climate change. Yes. And you've described it as the defining issue of our time. We hear again and again that it's make or break time. So I'd like to bring in this voice, and it's Enea Agoli, who asks, Secretary General, can we still reverse climate change?
We can, if we take action now. This summit meeting is almost the last opportunity for world leaders and business leaders, civil society leaders, to commit themselves. First, to do all possible to contain the rising global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade, and to cut the emissions commensurate to our standard, to this global temperature rise within 2 degrees, and mobilize market and finance to support the adaptation and mitigation of many developing countries who may not have capacity. And everybody should be on deck.
Well,
government, business, and civil society.
Everybody should be on deck, and bringing together this summit is a huge achievement. But you must be disappointed that the leaders of China, India, and Russia are staying away.
I have been discussing this matter in depth with the Chinese leaders and also Indian leaders. Of course, because of their domestic conflicting schedules, they are not be able to hear in person. But China is represented very high and senior person. Number 3 in the national political hierarchy.
But you must be, but it's sending out the wrong message, is it not?
Indian Prime Minister is coming, even though he's not
attending the
summit meeting per se. He's coming on 27th, Friday, and he's addressing the General Assembly. I expect that he will commit the Indian government bold and ambitious target.
But you must sometimes just want to put your head in your hands and cry, because it has been such a battle, has it not, to get where you are now, and there are still so many hurdles to cross.
Of course, there are still so many hurdles to cross over, but we have a very limited time. I am encouraged that the most number of world leaders, more than 125 prime ministers and heads of state and kings are participating, together with many tens of foreign ministers and environment ministers. This is the largest ever meeting. The climate march in New York, where 100,000
and it's unprecedented. You're joining in that. What will you be shouting in the megaphone?
Unprecedented for UN Secretary General joins all this crowd of 100,000 people marching together, sending out strong voice.
What's your message? If we can just ask you to reduce your message, you have the microphone in hand, the megaphone in hand. What is your message as you go through the streets of New York?
Take action now. If we do not do now, we will have to pay more. This is our world, and this planet Earth is burning now in the name of prosperity. We have to leave this planet Earth sustainable environmentally, socially, and economically. This is our world, and this is our succeeding generation's world. We have a moral and political responsibility.
Secretary General, many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.